I quite like this strip sander, although sometimes when sanding intricate shapes I often end up hitting the back on here. I thought it'd be fun to try to build a bigger one, and I found this belt and it's 42 inches long versus 30 inches for the other one, and I thought I'd try to use some roller skate wheels, and I've experimented on the table saw and I was able to cut this one flat. My idea was that this would be just a quickie project, but then I thought I'd work out some of the details in CAD, and a day later I came up with a complete CAD model for the whole sander. For a lot of the rectangular parts I won't bother gluing on the templates, but for the parts in this corner, they're complicated enough, I'll use them. I like to make best use of odd shaped scraps that I already have, and with templates like this it's easy. This would be pretty much impossible with CNC. I stuck these two pieces together with a bit of glue stick just to make sure I'd get the alignment of this hole and this slot exactly right with respect to each other. I drilled this hole most of the way through so that only the point went through, and I'm using that hole to line up where the Forstner bit goes from the other side. I was originally planning on putting the bearing on this side, but the belt is going to go on this side, so I figured if I put it in from the other side, it won't get as much dust. My plan is to put it together with glues and screws, but for now it's screws only in case I need to change something. It's really difficult to get these pieces aligned and screw them together at the same time, so I just mark the geometry of these holes on here and I'll drill those out and then use the holes to line it up as I screw it on. These two parts need to fit in here, so I'm just going to use two other pieces of plywood and put those on here like that, so I can get the alignment for the screw holes from here. Now these two bits need to come the same distance forward this way, so if I clamp that to be flush here, that'll give me alignment for this part here. These two things form the upper wheel mount, and there's a piece of plywood that needs to screw on the back here, and I need to get the alignment just right so that the front pulley isn't skewed in any way. So this is a scrap from cutting that piece there. So I'm using this as a spacer, but because I don't want it to be tight, I'm adding a couple of layers of paper in here, and they need to come exactly the same amount forward. And checking again. Having drilled two pilot holes, I put two screws in to fix the alignment, and then proceed to drill the rest of the pilot holes. Having drilled all the pilot holes, I take it apart again, and then expand the holes in the piece I'm screwing on, so that the screw thread won't engage that, and the screws will really pull it together. Now I'm going to turn one of these wheels into something more like this, except not quite like this, because this one I cut a little bit too deep and I cut away all the rubber. So I set up this circle cutting jig to cut most of it away on the bandsaw. Nice and flat now. Next I'll put a crown on it by cutting a bevel off either side. So there's my rubber wheel with a crown on it. I roughened up the end of the shaft, and this hole is a little bit too small, so I figure if I hammer it in there, I should get a good hold. So here's the drive wheel, and I put a crown on it too with the table saw blade. It's a little bit rough, but that means it'll have more grip on the sandpaper. So I just filed a small keyway in here and another keyway in the end of the shaft with an angle grinder. So now I can put those together. And now a small nail serves as a key. Now this is where things get a little bit unsafe because I'm going to use the table saw to carve a V-groove into here, and I'm going to turn it with a drill from far away so that my fingers won't get into trouble. Well, not looking too bad, but the groove is much too rectangular. Well, this pulley is less than perfect, but it fits the belt, so I'll stick with this one for now. So I used a different shaft to form this pulley because this one's already got the belt pulley on it permanently. So now I just need to somehow put that on here. And I want to move it back a bit further, so I'm going to cut a keyway right here. When I'm grinding that keyway, I actually used a block of wood as a guide for my angle grinder, and I just let it rub against that. Before I can mount that shaft, I need to fix what I have so far on the base. To get this shaft perpendicular, I drew a line down here, and then putting this bearing holder on here, I just have to eyeball it so that this line is parallel to the shaft, and then I can screw it down. Well, I made some kind of miscalculation because my belt is a little bit slack and I can't tighten this any further. So what I'm going to do is take this piece, unscrew it, and just move it up a little bit to take out that slack. I need to get the lateral position of this pulley just right, and for that I'm using a little spacer washer and one of these bushings that actually came from the roller skate wheels, and that goes right up against the bearing, although it probably won't end up spinning. So I'm just going to put a little bit of oil on here so I won't get too much friction against it there. And on the other side I'm using another one of these little spacers, and then I made this little block to go around the shaft to lock it in place. And now installing the pulley, and for a key I'm just going to try to use a screw. Let's see if that goes in there nicely. I also need to keep this wheel from sliding back and forth, so I made some spacers that fit very tightly on the shaft. Now I need something to push the back of the top wheel mount down to apply belt tension. I'm using a 1/3 horsepower furnace motor that came from the garbage. It works! There's a tracking adjustment that goes down here, which I haven't built yet, so I just jammed a screw in here. But this block with just a screw in it right here is for adjusting what angle this shaft is going to go at. So this carriage bolt and this knob lock the table on. And to keep the head of the bolt from spinning, there's this little block that goes on here. I've been noticing a fair bit of bearing chatter from these wheels, and it turns out the bearings actually don't fit entirely tightly in here. So to make that for a tight fit, I just made a paper shim and then the bearing. I still need to make an enclosure for it to keep the fingers out and the dust in. I'm adding some studs to the frame so I can screw on the cover. While I had the sander apart, I also moved everything this way a bit on the base to give more room on this side, and added this hole here for pulling the dust out, as well as wiring it up with an electrical switch on the motor. So originally I had an Allen key that would adjust the tracking screw right here, but that was awkward to adjust, and I want the dust collector hose to come out this way. So here's my new tracking adjustment. It's basically just this block of wood with a bump on it that pushes the shaft this way. And it fits on top of this threaded rod with a slot in the bottom. And then I put a knob on here. And that way I can very conveniently tweak the tracking, because I'd often want to tweak just where the edge of the belt is with respect to the plating, because when I'm edging some inside corners, that alignment is pretty critical. I'm also making a belt guard just so that the safety trolls will leave me alone. So now it's all done, and I didn't film painting it because that's boring. A strip sander like this can be used to sand curves just like a spindle sander, but how do you sand the inside curves? And this is where the coolest feature of the strip sander comes in. I can replace the platen in this one, and this platen is convex for rounding inside curves. This machine can't get into inside holes like you could with a spindle sander, but at the same time it works a lot faster and it can get into places that a spindle sander couldn't. And also, the dust all gets sucked into the machine, so you don't have all this dust all over the place like you would with a spindle sander.